Hey guys, welcome back. So, I've been putting in the hours, 500 to be exact, trying, building, destroying, and rebuilding, all while figuring out the mechanics of the game for you. What did I learn? Well, I've got plenty of juicy bits to share from all those ups and downs. But before we dive in, let me introduce you to Manor, one of the most watched games on Steam right now, with hundreds of thousands of fans eagerly waiting for the official release. Lucky me, I've had the chance to get stuck into this magical medieval world, and now I'm here to walk you through it. So, grab a seat, relax, and let's jump into some epic highs, some hilarious failures, and everything in between. First up, the game runs on Unreal Engine, and let me tell you, it's a stunner. The realism is off the charts. Right now, you can see my crew managing the fields, collecting wool or harvesting, one of the game's key resources. But let's not get distracted by the fluffy stuff. We're here for the hard lessons I've learned, starting with my first city, Goldhof. Now, Goldhof was my first attempt at building a city, and honestly, I made some right blunders here. But hey, that's how you learn, right? Most of my houses are developed to burgage plot level 3, the maximum you can reach at the moment. Let me break it down for you. Level 2, houses generate 1 gold per month per family, but upgrading to level 3 doubles that and gives you space for an extra family. So it's a no-brainer to upgrade. More hands on deck means more work gets done. Then there's the bakery. Oh, the bakery. I've got 4 families crammed into the same building, all meant to be baking bread for me. But guess what? Despite having 2 full floors of flour just waiting to be turned into delicious loaves, I'm sitting here with 0. Yep, not a single loaf. Honestly, with the amount of wheat I'm growing, I should be drowning in bread by now, enough to feed a medieval army. But nope, here we are, still waiting for those loaves to magically appear. How did this happen? Let's find out. Alright, before we dive deeper into the bread catastrophe, let's first take a look at my second city, Hofstetten, to better understand how I managed to stumble upon some more lessons and mistakes. Hofstetten is a beautiful spot, nestled right by the lake, so I thought I'd try a different strategy here. Fishing. I set up 43 villagers to fish, thinking one little fisherman's hut with 3 people would do the trick. Well, turns out they were more interested in sitting around twiddling their thumbs. So much for my grand fishing plan. Alright, let's take a quick peek at our marketplace in Hofstetten. Spoiler alert, things aren't looking too great. We've got a measly 2% of the fuel needed, 31% of the food supply, and, wait for it, 100% of the clothing. Yep, it seems that keeping everyone dressed is the only thing this game's mechanics are getting right. But food, not so much. So here's the situation. 31 fish for 370 people. And keep in mind, this is my most developed city, a lakeside paradise, in theory. It's supposed to be thriving, but nope. Instead, we've got medieval citizens scraping by on 12 pieces of meat, 2 eggs, and 12 sad little veggies. I was hoping those veggies would be the vitamin boost they desperately needed to survive the harsh winter, but, well, let's just say things are looking bleak. In Hofstetten, I also experimented with crops. I built loads of fields, wheat, flax, and barley. Here's where the game gets interesting. Different crops have different soil fertility requirements. Wheat is great for making bread, flax is for linen, and barley, well, that's for ale. And if you know anything about the UK, you'll know that ale is essential. It's not just fun to brew, but you need it to progress to level 3 buildings. Now here's an important tip for surviving in Manor Lords. Everything you produce can be sold. To do that, you'll need to build a trading post. In my experience, one person working there is more than enough to keep things running smoothly. And when it comes to those surplus goods, it's always better to sell them off rather than let them pile up. But here's the catch. Trading doesn't move at lightning speed. It's a slow process by default. If you want to speed things up, you've got to establish a trade route. you can see the option on the right side of the screen. For example, I can trade stone blocks for 600 gold and have the trader come straight to my city. To demonstrate, let's unlock a trade route for hides and, just like that, toss 400 gold into the mix. But for your trade routes to really function effectively, you'll need a horse to carry the goods. Here's how you do it. Make sure to assign a horse to your trade post so the trader can actually haul the goods. Oxen should be assigned to your farmers to help with their work, and mules to the pack station, which is where you can exchange goods between regions. And here's a general but very useful tip for developing your town. Always use the tab key to see all your assignments. It's a quick way to check what's missing. If you see red, it means something's not assigned properly. And if you see 1/2, it means there's still one available spot that can be filled. Trust me, keeping an eye on these details will save you a lot of headaches. Alright, let's do a quick dive into my latest city, Immenreich. As you can see, it's just getting started, and I've left it this way to show you the early stages of development. The first step is to build 6 to 7 burgage plots for your villagers to live in. And trust me, you'll want to make sure they've got plenty of veggies so they don't starve and die from hunger. After that, you'll want to set up a wood harvesting facility, followed by sawmills. Only then should you move on to meat and berry harvesting. My strategy here is to keep the number of houses as low as possible and focus on upgrading them to level 3. Why? Well, upgrading the houses extends the pantry space, and each house can support 2 to 4 families, which is a huge help with garden work. I've also used one of my development points on apples, which in reality is a wise investment. After about 3 years, you'll have enough apples to sustain the city, as long as your villagers have the free time to actually harvest them. If they're overworked, you'll end up with apples and veggies left to rot in the gardens, unattended. Alright, as you can see, we're sitting at only 15% of the food supply, with just 8 vegetables and 0 apples so far. Why no apples, you ask? Well, that's because they're only harvested in September, so they free up the villagers for the rest of the year. Essentially, I only need them to focus on apple harvesting for 1 month out of the year. The rest of the time, they can be working on other tasks to keep things running smoothly. And now, let's take a look at my beautiful apple gardens. Honestly, I highly recommend building these as soon as you've got a bit of money in your pocket. Just remember, each tree produces a limited amount of apples, so the bigger the plot, the better. But don't forget, you'll need plenty of hands to collect them in September. Otherwise, you'll be left with unharvested fruit. Timing is key. Now, let's move on to cell bits, where I thought I'd try something new. Charcoal burning, mining, and deep mining. The idea was to tap into infinite deposits. I've got a rich salt mine here, so I built a deep mine extension. But surprise! It ran completely dry. 0 resources, despite all my efforts. So, mistake number 3. Investing in deep mining. Don't do it. On the flip side, charcoal burning was a smashing success. I've got nearly 4,000 units of fuel stockpiled. The process is simple. Cut down trees, send the wood to the charcoal kiln, and boom, fuel for everyone. I've even started bartering the excess in other regions. So, at least I got one thing right. As you can see, I've tried limiting the marketplace by setting up just a few stalls, but it's been completely useless. It's had no effect on the overall supply. On top of that, I've got a brewery right here, with plenty of barley fields nearby, but still, 0 ale. It's an absolute catastrophe. A grand catastrophe. The only thing worse would be running out of gin in London this winter. And just to illustrate the madness, let's check my malt house. I'll add a few more workers there, and guess what they'll do? Just stand around, staring at the sky, doing absolutely nothing. Meanwhile, my fields are overflowing with barley. Yet, despite all this, I'm still facing a sea of red on my map, shortages of just about everything, except clothing, again, and charcoal. Those seem to be the only things that actually work right. Another thing I've noticed, Adding extra people to the tavern or storage facilities doesn't change a thing. In fact, they work just fine with only one person running the show. There's no noticeable improvement when I fill them up to full capacity with workers. It's like adding more people just means more of them standing around doing nothing. Same story with the windmills. One person seems to do the job just as well as having all 3 workers in there. I'm pretty sure that's not how it's supposed to work, but hey, that's the sad story of medieval life, isn't it? Back then you'd either be grinding flour or waiting around for the plague to show up. So maybe they're just enjoying the downtime. I do believe that medieval windmills were quite innovative, but I think mine have taken the concept of slow and steady to a whole new level. If they go any slower, we might be producing flour for the next century. Now, let's switch to the charming medieval town of Zweiau, where life moves so slow you'd think time stopped centuries ago. Nothing ever changes here, and honestly, the villagers seem perfectly content with that. They're as happy as anyone could be, just plodding along with their daily routines, blissfully unaware that the rest of the world might actually be advancing. It's like living in a medieval time capsule, slow, steady, and full of happy villagers who don't seem to mind at all. You know, in the Middle Ages, people believed in divine laziness, taking things slow because rushing might just offend the heavens. I think my villagers have taken that belief to heart. They're doing so little, they might as well be waiting for divine intervention. Alright, now let's shift our focus to Eichenhau. This town's got its own vibe, a bit more industrious, but still with that medieval charm. Things are moving a little faster here compared to the leisurely life in Zweiau, but let's not get too excited. The villagers are still taking their sweet time getting anything done, but at least there's some progress. Let's see what Eichenhau has in store. This region has a lake as well, and things are actually running pretty smoothly here. My strategy was to first build vegetable gardens and then move on to apple gardens. They're quite mature at this point, and as you can see, the apple trees are ripe and ready. It's September after all. The villagers couldn't be happier because it's time for their annual apple pie, or maybe apple strudel if they're feeling fancy. Did you know that in medieval times apples were a staple crop, but they didn't eat them fresh very often? Most of the time, apples were turned into cider because it was safer to drink than water. I guess my villagers would have preferred a cider festival, but they'll have to settle for apple strudel this year. And once September rolls around and the apple harvest is done, my villagers finally have time to turn their attention to the vegetable gardens in their backyards. A quick reminder, always make sure to build those gardens large enough so they can actually sustain themselves. You don't want your medieval villagers thinking they can survive the winter on a few cabbages, do you? Alright, let me make this crystal clear. Those development points you earn from building and upgrading your city, spend them wisely. Charcoal, that's a definite yes. But deep mining, trash from the trash. Once you've spent your points on it, there's no going back, and you'll be stuck with the consequences. Trust me, I've been there. My salt mine is now sitting with 0 deposits, completely useless. So don't waste your points like I did. When it comes to meat and butchers, it actually makes sense to spend a development point on trapping and then build your butchers. But here's the trick. Make sure you build 2 of them. One for producing meat from sheep. And yes, you'll need a stable supply of sheep, either by spending another point or by buying them from the livestock trader. The other butcher? That's for sausages. And I'm pretty sure they're German sausages, given that all these city names sound a bit German to me. And just look at these beauties. Sheep everywhere. Have you ever dreamed of being the proud owner of a massive herd? Well, I ended up with around 100 sheep and 100 lambs, which is just enough to keep my meat production going and maintain a steady supply of sausages for my medieval hot dogs. Who knew herding could be so rewarding? And as a bonus tip, lambs produce loads of wool which you can use for, you guessed it, clothing. It's like medieval fashion at its finest. And the best part, you only need 1 sheep herder to gather the wool and take it to the warehouse, where your weavers and tailors will work their magic. It's like running a medieval H&M, just with more sheep and fewer trendy jackets. So don't be afraid. Do like me. Become the proud owner of a massive herd and enjoy the benefits. Wool can be sold or used to produce highly prized clothes and gambesons. Medieval chic, anyone? And yes, you can sell those too. Plus, you've got a stable source of meat flowing into your village. It's a win-win. Wool, fashion and food, all thanks to your trusty sheep. So, to recap, trapping? Yes. Advanced skinning? Absolutely yes. It doubles the amount of meat produced. And who doesn't want more meat? But apiary? Nope. It's a no-go. It barely produces any honey, just a few sad drops. Barely worth noticing. And wild berries? Well, they don't seem to work properly either. I've spent my points twice and ended up with nothing. Total waste. Now let's talk about my fourth big mistake. Vegetable gardens. Early in the game you think, let's get these villagers growing vegetables. We'll never go hungry. And sure enough, at first, the gardens are great. You've got loads of food. But as time goes on, the fertility of the land seems to plummet. It's like there's some hidden mechanic in the game that drains the soil's fertility without warning. Suddenly, you're left with nothing. It's kind of like the game's tax system, where your annual taxes just keep increasing. No matter how well you manage your money, those taxes keep climbing. I suspect the same thing happens with the land. Fertility just drops off over time, and there's no clear way to fix it. For example, in one of my wheat fields, fertility is down to 38%, even with fallow land that's supposed to restore it. But without ships to bring in more resources, the fertility just keeps declining. My wheat harvest is down to 87 units, and it's simply not enough. The whole supply chain, farmers, granaries, windmills, should be working smoothly. But when it comes time to collect the bread, still nothing. Zero food variety. Surely, it all depends on the soil and fertility, and the game has a system in place to guide you. For example, blue areas indicate where the water flows, and water can only be drained from those spots. Your people will need a stable water supply at all times, so keep an eye on that. As for planting, there's a clear visual system. Green zones are the best areas to plant, while red zones are the worst. It's all layered, so sometimes these zones overlap, which means you really have to plan wisely if you want your crops to thrive. And yes, in some cases you might end up with an entire region painted in all shades of red, just like I have here. When that happens, there's really no clear way to fix it other than establishing a good barter system. So, what's the plan? Focus on veggies and apples instead. The only thing you'll need is barley, malt or ale to upgrade to level 3 houses in that area. It's not ideal, but it works. So don't go all in with the all-vegetable garden strategy like I did. I built massive gardens, long plots meant to support one family per plot. I thought it would create a self-sustaining little village, living off the land. But by January, I was down to just 10 vegetables, nowhere near enough to get through winter. Some of my villagers will probably starve. Definitely not my finest moment. But to summarise everything, the game is still in its early stages, and honestly, it's looking very promising. I don't regret spending my 500 plus hours playing this game. Despite the quirks and logical issues, I've really enjoyed it. You'll notice that many of the development points are locked right now, and policies are very limited, basically useless at the moment. But I expect the devs will fix these issues soon. And who knows? We might even see a multiplayer mode someday. It'd be a blast to build a kingdom with friends. Who knows? Alright folks, that's all for today's medieval misadventures. If you enjoyed watching me fumble my way through those never-ending hours of Manor Lords, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Trust me, you don't want to miss out on more of my brilliant and not so brilliant strategies. Plus, who knows, maybe next time I'll actually figure out how to keep my villagers from starving. See you in the next one.